Hi, it's Rhiannon Faith, and I wanted to tell you a story. Well, really, this will be a series of stories, little snippets of things that happened during childhood that I thought were kind of fun and sparked interest in having recently spoken to my sister about some of these things. So I thought they were fun to share, so I'm doing that now. When we were young, we often did not have much in the way of financial resources, and thankfully, our mom was super creative, and so we always had little adventures, even though the means weren't always there to fund really extravagant adventures. We had lots of creative opportunities and connecting with things in ways that don't always happen nowadays because kids are so quick to go to technology. But when we were little, we had baby dolls and stuffed animals, which is not unique, of course, but we were really connected to our baby dolls and stuffed animals. So much so that they went everywhere with us. And so my stuffed animals, for example, always very perfectly set on my bed. Everybody had to be facing out so they could breathe. I know that sounds crazy. I recognize that as an adult. And yet I still legitimately think that they need to do it. I'll be facing out and nobody could be blocking someone else because then they wouldn't be able to breathe. So, and I would tell them stories and everybody had a first and middle name. It was a very official sort of situation. So my stuffed animals were my family, my kids, my friends a lot of the time because we often moved around. And while I'm plenty social and had no trouble making friends, I also wanted an extension of my friends. So those were my baby dolls and stuffed animals. We would go on picnics pretty frequently, a cheap and fun thing that we could do. And we had the little miniature Tupperware set. My mom sold Tupperware back in the day. So we had the kids' Tupperware set, including all the little plates and cups and the cake taker. So we could take our little cake treats onto the park. So my mom would make, or sometimes she would let us help, often she would let us help, but we would make cakes in tuna cans, washed up tuna cans, because two of them fit perfectly to make a little 2-layered cake to go in our cake taker. So we would pack our picnic, including our stuffed animals, and my sister and I each had a stuffed animal that was very special, more special than some of the other ones. So mine was Perry. He was a multicolored dog, kind of Dachshund-esque kind of dog. Dachshund-esque sort of dog, not the car, the dog. And he was fabulous. He had kind of rings of these different colors. And my grandmother, my grandma Moyers, my mom's mom, she knit him for me, or crocheted him for me. He was my favorite. And everywhere I went and everything I did, Perry went with me. He was always the one who got to sleep snuggle with me at night. So when we would go on a picnic, Perry got to go on the picnic. And my sister, at the same time, roughly the same time I got Perry, she got Budsy. And Budsy was a little brown bear. And my sister loved Budsy like something crazy. So if we were going on a picnic, Budsy was her companion. So it would be my sister, myself, Budsy, and Perry with our mom. And so we'd lay out our blanket and we'd have our little picnic. And my mom would cut up sandwiches for us. So we would have sandwiches that would fit on, like in little shapes. So they would fit on our little Tupperware plates, which was wonderful. And apparently my storytelling goes back to these early years because one particular place we lived at during this was Married Student Housing in Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents went to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And so we were, again, why we were so poor. My parents were going to school and they had side jobs to make do. But I was about 4 or 5 when they started there. And so Kristen would have been 1 or 2 in that range. So she was really little. And so back to why my storytelling started early, I would go over and above and beyond to convince her that Budsy and Perry were legitimately real because they were real in my mind. And so I worked on this for a long time, but I mastered my delivery, convincing her that Perry and Budsy were eating their sandwiches off their plates. And so I was really discreet about, hey, did you see over there? And I'd take a little nibble and my mom got in on the fun, all for the purpose of keeping the magic alive. not necessarily to deceive my sister, but that Perry and Budsy were real. So she had no recollection of this, but honestly, there are lots of things she doesn't remember. So she had a vague memory. I don't want to misspeak, but anything outside of 9 years old didn't happen in my poor sister's memory. So sharing these stories is not just about sharing with any of you who would be listening, but also sharing the fun things with her that she sometimes forgot. So this was one of them we were talking about. But we would have these grand times going on these little adventures and these picnics, and we would put our animals in the swings and push them on the swings, and sometimes our baby dolls would come instead. There was one time I had a baby doll named Cynthia. She had long dark hair and she was lovely, kind of like an Amish doll, except she had a face, but that same kind of style of doll. And I liked her quite a lot, and so I would take her places. And I remember I took her to see Peter Pan. We would go to all of the different student option items at the university. So we would go and see these spectacular performances, but at the student rate or during dress rehearsals. So we had lots of culture introduced to us at an early age, which was amazing, and going to museums and all of those things. But oftentimes if we were going, we had a friend in arm. And so when, not a happy memory, but we were talking about a couple weeks ago about how when we moved from Knoxville, we had packed up all of our stuff and we were putting it in long-term storage, which we actually ended up losing. And so when we packed, quite unexpectedly, I packed Perry. And I don't normally, again, he would be an animal that would come with me anywhere all the time. But I packed him at the very top of the box because he was like the captain of the ship. He had to keep everyone calm. And I had a full pep talk. Now, again, this was in 8th grade. So I was like 13 years old. But whatever. Keep the magic alive for myself. So Perry was put at the top of the box, and I gave him a pep talk and explained to him that he was staying with the rest of the stuffed animals and dolls because he was the strongest, and they all knew who was my favorite. And so he would be able to keep them calm and reassure them that we'd be together again. And so when I learned that we had lost all of our stuff, I remember the thing that bothered me more than anything, and there was a lot to be bothered about by that. There was everything we had acquired since I was 2 years old when we had lost all of our stuff then. Sort of a connected the dots. This happened more than once. So in any event, during that time, I just kept thinking about Perry and how scared he must have been to have been left behind, and that I had lied and told him that I was going to see him again, and then I had not, and all the rest of my dolls and stuffed animals that were gone. And so while I know technically that's silly, those were my friends when sometimes life was really challenging and I needed somebody who would just listen. And so that was a really challenging time for me. And again, my most devastating part of all of that was that I had lost Perry. Even though it had been years since we had had him, this was round about my junior year that we learned, late my junior year, that we had lost everything. It could have been later. So it had been a couple of years. But the Christmas of my senior year, so I had just turned 17, I was opening up my presents, and my most treasured present that I've ever gotten, my grandma, Moyers, knit me another Perry. So it was the most wonderful thing. I have a picture from that morning just hugging him. So if that doesn't tell a story about who I am as a person, that at 17 years old, totally normal, well-adjusted, well, I guess normal's an overreach, super weird, but honestly, mainstream kiddo at 17, I was so moved and just I felt so loved and understood that my grandma made me another Perry. Hands down, best gift. And it wasn't because I was recapturing something from my childhood per se, but he was my security. He was my home. I think I mentioned in a prior video when I was going through a challenging time and just recognizing, how challenging things had been and how it seemed somewhat never ending. I laid there and I was hugging my Perry 2, and I knew that it was more important for me to just be grateful for the things that I had when I had them, instead of to mourn their loss in a disruptive way where I didn't move forward or continue. And so getting Perry 2, he's had this mark in my life ever since. And up until more recently, I had traveled, anytime I'd leave home, Perry came with me because I was never going to leave him behind again. And so here I am, super grown woman, traveling with my stuffed dog. And when I was in my high school years, like later in my senior year after having him and then dating afterwards, if a guy was mean to my Perry dog, forget it, because he always sat on the head of the bed, and like this was a thing, a place of honor. So you respect the dog or you hit the road. I wish I was kidding. It's like 100% how that goes. So now you know a little something more about me probably than you expected or bargained for, but all of this weird didn't come overnight, right? Like this developed over time. It wasn't until a while after dating my fiance that I started to feel less like I needed to cling to a home that was with my dog Perry, and I felt like he was my new home, and I felt that sense of safety that I had longed for as a child but didn't have in a lot of settings and situations. But it's kind of incredible that that would be a thing, and just that transition of heart and mind and peaceability that comes with that. But I did work very hard to instill the same magic and curiosity and creativity in my kids. And so while Cheyenne has her Renee doll, and Caitlin has Olivia, and Charlie has baby Jeff, they have not developed as close connection with their dolls as Kristen and I. But if you were to talk to her and ask her about her babies or Budsy, she would tell you the same. They always and forever will hold a very special place in our hearts. So that's all I wanted to tell you about today. Come back again and I'll tell you another story. Thanks.